In today's bite-sized economics video, we're going to be looking at consumer and producer surplus. So first off, what you need to know is the actual definitions of them. So what is consumer surplus? What is producer surplus? Well, consumer surplus is the value that consumers gain from consuming a good or service over and above the paid price. So it's an extra gain they receive. So say you're willing to pay £1 for a bag of apples, and actually at the market they're selling them for 50p. Your consumer surplus is that 50p difference between what you actually pay and what you're prepared to pay. So it is always the area above market price and below the demand curve. And due to the law of diminishing marginal utility, consumer surplus generally declines with extra units consumed. So what I mean by saying that is, say you're willing at the beginning to pay £1 for a chocolate bar, and then they give it to you for 80p. Then you're like, oh great, okay, I've got 20p of consumer surplus. And then they're like, okay, right, here, I'm going to buy another one. So you have another chocolate bar. This time you're a little bit full from the first one, so you're only willing to pay 90p. So then your consumer surplus has decreased. So now your consumer surplus is only 10p. And then you decide you're going to have a third chocolate bar, but again, you're quite full now, so you're only willing to pay 85p. And because you're charged 80p, this time your consumer surplus has decreased even further to just 5p. So that's what the law of diminishing marginal utility is saying, is that the more you consume, the less willing you are to pay a higher price, which means that your consumer surplus keeps and keeps and keeps decreasing because you're willing to pay less and less each time. Now we're talking about producer surplus. So producer surplus is the difference between the price received by firms of a good or service and the price at which they would have been prepared to supply at. So it's kind of a bit like consumer surplus, except for this time what you're saying is that if you've got a customer, you're selling diamond rings, you're going to sell them for £500 each, and then you have customers come over and say, oh, can I please buy the diamond ring? I want to buy it for £800. And therefore your producer surplus is going to be £300 because you're prepared to sell it for £500, but someone's just come and offered you £800 for it. So that's what producer surplus is. So here we can see it on our demand and supply curve. So consumer surplus is, do you remember what I said about it being below the demand curve? So obviously if it's above the demand curve, then you're saying that they're paying higher for it, but actually what they're doing is they're paying less and less for it. So how I remember that consumer surplus is below the demand you see these two triangles here. We've got consumer surplus on top and producer surplus at the bottom. How I remember that consumer surplus at the top as a top triangle is that producers always put the consumers first. So like any kind of company's motto is put the consumers first. So that's why it's at the top. And yeah, sometimes this graph's a bit tricky to kind of get your head around at the beginning, but the more and more you use it in economics and the more you apply it in your essays and things, the easier and easier it is to learn. So it's just kind of like looking at it, basically, that will help you to learn it. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to try and get it in your head, but the more you use it, the easier it becomes. Cool. So that is everything on consumer and producer surplus for the definitions and the graph. And now we're just going to go and see how changes in supply and demand might affect consumer and producer surplus. Now I wish I was able to use a cursor here because that would be very useful, but we can't. So what we're looking at is, okay, we've got a demand curve here. Now picture the demand curve shifting out towards the right. So our green one here is going to move towards the right. It's getting bigger and bigger, which shows that there's a higher demand for it. What's happening, if we pretend that there's another line here, is we're going to reach a new equilibrium point on our supply curve. So we're going to have a higher price because if you're demanding more, then suppliers are able to charge a higher price. And then what this is going to mean is that producers are going to have a bigger surplus. So the red triangle is going to get even bigger and the green triangle is going to shrink because producers are getting higher prices. So even if they're willing to sell at a lower price, they're going to have a bigger producer surplus because they're going to be able to get a higher market equilibrium price, whereas consumer surplus is going to decrease because now the prices are higher, which means that the gap between what they're willing to pay and what they actually pay is going to shrink. So that's kind of what's summarised here. So when demand shifts to right, it means that consumers are placing a higher value on these goods. They're prepared to demand more at any given price. The market will move to a new equilibrium with price rising and quantity traded increasing. There is a movement along the supply curve. And that is everything for consumer and producer surplus. I hope you learned a little bit, and feel free to leave any comments if you are confused. I'll be more than happy to help. Right, thanks for listening. Bye.